Hello, everybody. We are back for part two of our media analysis. Uh, Unlike part one, where we focused on Oscar Schindler and Schindler's List, we are now going to be looking at Battlefield 5 and the war stories of both Nordlies and The Last Tiger. So, Battlefield 5, a game which released in November 2018, we are given a more contemporary vision of loosely inspired events that portray the war in the video game industry. And through the designated chapters of Nordlies, the occupation of Norway in 1943, and The Last Tiger, the final months of the war in Germany in April 1945. We will be first focusing on Nordlies, understanding of the war, as we kind of cover authenticity meeting gameplay within history. So, as a video game, Battlefield 5 tells a inspired event based on which is real history, kind of which combines with fictional narrative telling the story of Norwegian commandos who utilized skis and guerrilla warfare to resist the occupation. Nordley's story reflects aspects of authenticity regarding the brand of self as well as the context of war. We see this empowerment and authenticity revolving around the two main characters of this act, Solvig and Astrid, two women, a mother and a daughter, who kind of portray a loosely inspired plethora of history revolving around Norwegian commandos as they kind of fight against occupation. So next we have Nordley's about the culture of occupation and heroism. So again, the story follows Solvig and Astrid, a mother of a united freedom fighter organization, and they are resisting the German occupation, specifically looking to dismantle a production of heavy water. For those who do not know, heavy water was a super weapon in the works that would create more powerful explosives at the time. And the events in game are inspired by many of the unnamed heroes whose record was never widely recognized. And that's going to be a big theme revolving around today's lecture is kind of recognition of events within representation and kind of amassing a changing perception within the mind. So next we have the representation of struggle. So survival is a pretty key theme within Nordley. And by the way, Nordley represents and roughly translates to Northern Lights, and that's the chapter title. And it's supposed to kind of give a meaning of a beacon of hope, the beauty of the world, and its ability to fight for that beauty. And the understanding of that for the battling of the Nazis' Third Reich as a contrast uh, kind of is embodied through struggle. As Solvig, the main character that we, the character, play as, are battling against not only soldiers but extreme conditions like hypothermia and natural elements. Solvig experiences struggle, operating mostly alone at a young age, I believe around 16 to 17 years old, while fighting for Norway, but most importantly for other survival, specifically with the production of heavy water, as mentioned earlier. So this section ends off on a pretty brief note. Sacrifice, unhappy ending as a reality. Although Solvig and Astrid succeed in their mission, they don't survive the encounter. Astrid blows up it's the last component of heavy water, blowing herself up as Solvig sinks into the icy depths below. Her death is implied, and although she was young and heroic, many people are not given that happy ending seen within most modern forms of media as a form of heroism. And that is because the nature and reality of war is cold. And with that understanding, we are kind of given a representation of the fallen heroes, especially within the occupation of Norway, who many of which lost their lives. And although entertaining is a video game, we are educated about the struggle and can empathize through the entertainment provided within the game genre. This is empowerment of Norwegian culture. An unhappy ending embodies a meaning that invokes powerful emotion within its own merit. The depiction on the right is the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And for those who don't know, it's a memorial here in the United States that stands to recognize all of those who lost their lives in conflict and war, for all the people who did not have their body recovered, and whose names and identities are lost to time, many of which in battles are often unrecognized throughout the years, especially in the current year, 2025. Most people don't have a great understanding of and wartime events. And it's important to pay homage as Battlefield 5 portrays that homage in its own unique way. Okay, moving on to the last tiger, the anti-heroes and guilt section. Here we're getting a different portrayal of 1945 Germany, and we're kind of moving away from that Norway theme with Nordlys and looking away from Astrid and Solveig into a different crew of characters, uh, consisting of a German tank crew. Peter, Kurtz, Schroeder, and Hartmann. Peter is a tank commander, Kurtz is the driver mechanic, Schroeder is the main gunner, and Hartmann is the side gunner. And all of them have a interplay about their character dynamic, in which we will be following character foils and their understandings of war. So, following up on that previous endeavor, we have anti-heroes, perspective, and guilt. This tank crew has gone through Africa, Europe, and by the end of Germany, is fighting within the Rhineland in the closing days of the war. Peter narrates the opening segment of this media portrayal, and he kind of gives a quick story about how when he was younger, he was with a group of friends who robbed a store. And his father was disappointed in him for quote unquote being there. And now many people couldn't really understand the implication of a short story like that, but it foreshadows his involvement as a tank commander in the Nazi army. His being there is conflicting with his sense of self and morality as a human being. And by the end of the war story, he is willing to give up and surrender. He portrays themes of an anti by giving up and by relenting. And although many people would kind of be quick to judge and say that's not really a heroic action, you have to understand that many people at the time were forced into service at a either young age or a suitable military age in the defense of the fatherland. And although he was there from an earlier point, like I said, from Africa's campaign from 1941 to 1943, we are kind of given a perception about perceptive and ultimately how that kind of ties into what it means to be an anti-hero as we relent against violence. As Peter, the tank commander and the focus of the story, puts his foot down, and we are urged to kind of remember that soldiers are also people. So, foil and conflict. So, understanding four characters is kind of important for this brief understanding. Peter and Kurtz represent the old soldier, tired of war yet acclimated to its struggle, while Hartmann and Schroeder represent youth. They are naive and they fear battle. And although Hartmann is more innocent and more naive, Schroeder is fully indebted to the Nazi ideology. And we're going to see how that plays into the visual that I'm going to play, which is roughly 2 to 3 minutes long. Although the older, more experienced soldiers show uniformity, Hartmann is afraid, and Schroeder is committed to the Nazi war effort even at its end. Hartmann deserts his unit, is hanged, and he is strung up with a sign that calls him a coward in German. And although I don't have a visual to show that, I think it is important to realize the events as they transpire because understanding how the foil of these characters works within conflict is a good understanding about media within the modern day of war, knowing how gritty the war actually was. So before I play this, I will give a quick warning that you will see people get shot, and there is minor cursing involved. Please bear with it. If you do not wish to watch it, you can skip to about 3 minutes, 4 minutes from now, and you will be completely and away from it. So Peter's the one on the tank. Kurtz is the one who's standing outside.
Sie haben uns verraten. Die haben die Brücke gesprengt. Die wollen uns hier verrecken lassen. Das weißt du nicht,
They had
Cat.
just been left behind by the rest of the German army,
jetzt
who left the bridge to cover their own retreat, leaving these four
Starke Zeiten!
of these freemen.
Ach Gott, sieh dich doch um, Peter. Gott, steh uns bei.
As old soldiers, they show their regret
Alles,
for the
woran wir
actions
geglaubt
of
haben.
once great Camilla.
Alles, was wir dafür getan haben.
They show guilt. They show
Es ist
themes of
vorbei.
being an antidote.
Nein, Cat. Komm,
They are tired and they wish
Tu
for
das nicht,
conflict
Cat.
to end.
Peter, es ist vorbei.
And Oscar moves to walk away from the conflict. He is shot in the head.
War ein Verrecker.
Just like Cartman
Cat!
hurts his foot
Cat!
for trying to use it.
Weiß ja, war ihr Freund. Aber er ist desertiert. Gemeinsam sind wir stärker, richtig? Die Schwachen überleben nicht. Das waren doch ihre Worte, oder? Sagen Sie's! War das nicht so?
That's now the unbuilding of Peter Chance. That's the Iron Cross. And its symbolism is going to show this Peter and his red is to stop. Unlike Schroeder that we was still continuing on the plate, Peter represents the guilt and is willing to take responsibility for his actions. Looking at his dead friends, he now clutches onto the Iron Cross. He takes it off, and he does it in the side, putting it down in the dirt, standing up, and his world is correct. Schroeder looks on, mortified, and he shoots him in the back as well, turning his gun on him, and we kill him. Now, what did that fully display? It displays a perception that many people are not given about Germany's side of the war, how many German lives were lost in their attempt to do good as they are killed by their own people in a fit of nationalism. And that media portrayal is important because without it, we are not given that same humanity like many of the others that we've done within this lecture regarding women, regarding Norwegian culture, and regarding especially Jewish culture and Polish. Many of these communities who had suffered, Germany also suffered during a time of war, and it's because not everyone was a Nazi. The German Republic, for example, the initial bearers of the Iron Cross, its meaning was twisted and made into something that did not fundamentally support the ideas that Germany as a nation, when it was founded in 1870, stood for. And now we're going to be covering diversity and representation and the negative reviews of Battlefield 5. So, video games as a media have not been fully explored as much as film or novels, yet they have become a especially dominant foundation in the realm of storytelling, especially during the years of COVID in like 2020, 2021. Video games became a more projected market and had a bigger audience and demographic to follow. So, although Battlefield 5 told fictitious stories that were inspired by real events and they're not based on them entirely down to the last fact, the general audience was very dismissive, especially of Nordley's story, for focusing more on women. And as told by Dr. David in 2023, he has a YouTube video on diversity and representation in video games. I recommend you go watch that. The time is now for kind of representation and diversity as we kind of work towards a better future and kind of focus on the new market that isn't just made for men, but also women. And this is especially important within modern contemporary visions of media because we want to give a full perspective. Although Battlefield 5 was not exactly true to the full historical nature of the Second World War, they were telling a story inspired by those true events and were willing to kind of twist the narrative a little bit in order to tell a cool and unique story and also open up that history to a wider demographic. So, moving into the conclusion segments, Battlefield 5 utilized a lot of gameplay in order to tell a very unique angle about broad generalizations of history. They were able to empower cultures and women, and a perspective which was granted to Germany in the closing segment of the war offers insight into struggle in a unique. Although the education may have lacked due to fictional niche, entertainment and empathy certainly had its impact. Depiction matters, and as reviews and perspective of the game's audience tell a larger story about the work that still needs to be done. So, unfortunately, most of the negative critique that came out of the Battlefield 5 war stories mainly had to do with Solvik and Astrid as women of representation being kind of casted in a guerrilla warfare like state instead of what would have been traditionally done by most women within occupation as spies or as medics. And although there are some necessity to those critiques as history buffs kind of give their opinion, unfortunately, most of the view, which is seen as negative, kind of comes and stems from a place of dominant male gaze, not having their own interpretation and representation be told within the Second World War, despite the fact that every other war story, of which there are a total of five, tell the stories of brave men. And I believe that is important because as we move into the modern day, we have our own perceptions and we should work more towards that representation. Now we move into the lecture wrap up, where we will kind of give quick little mentions about Schindler's List and Peter, especially as antiheroes. The next section will also be covering women, more specifically, and occupation. So, Oskar Schindler is depicted as a man who grows in a traditional hero from what he witnesses on the home front, whereas Peter Mueller is depicted as an excellent leader who grows to hate what he represents on the front lines. We get a different distinction and perception of these two characters, and although Oskar Schindler is more of a humanitarian and he is more cast of a traditional hero, and we're given more time to unravel his character, we are only given a bit of information about Peter himself. And although he does not do anything that is traditionally heroic, he stands up and surrenders by putting his foot down, whereas his entire unit, except for Schroeder, was killed for desertion, which is wild to think about. But for all of them to stand up and say, enough fighting, it's been enough, and within their media portrayal, they give us more of that humanity of what often lacks within the perception of 1945 Germany about the German struggle of the war and its ultimate conclusion. So both of these characters display themes of category of what it means to be an antihero, and they do so on opposing sides of the conflict. And the last lecture wrap up is about the representation and othering of Jewish people and women. So Nordlies represents the culture of occupation and resistance and women's empowerment under set conditions. Schindler's List portrays Poland's occupation through the lens of Jewish suffering. With the mediums of film and video games, the outlook shifts by the perception of public in terms of portrayal and realism. So although the stories were both based on, or sorry, inspired by real events, they were not fully based on them. And although that didn't really matter for Schindler's depiction, many people within the 2018 audience of Battlefield 5's narrative took a big critique to Nardley's representation. And although that is a form of othering, I believe, as I think some of it has to do with sexism, with the unfortunate prospect that many people who had these critiques did so in a way that was very diminutive of women's impact in the war. We kind of get a marginalized perspective, both in the time of 1943, the time of Nordley's person, and modern day kind of give us a teachable moment about representation. Why do these values matter? Especially as we look towards the Jewish representation in Schindler's List, as we did in part one, where representation, and especially within lecture two, where we talked about depiction, why do these things matter? Because as we move into the contemporary age of modern media, we get to look back at these instances within history and we get to see the times change, right? And they reflect our values, they make their own meaning, right? Stuart Hall and John Story and the contextuality of meaning, they allow us through these media lenses to kind of back in time or to even peer forward. And in the case of both Battlefield 5 and Schindler's List, we see a remarkable tale of representation given the four themes which we have covered: education, empowerment, empathy, and entertainment. All four of these themes are tied within the narratives of media, and they have told a remarkable story about the brave lives who were unfortunately lost during a very sad and gritty time. That wraps up our full lecture. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you very much.